You must have heard this. Fiscal responsibility is the cornerstone of Republican politics. It is a facade, an absolute lie, a talking point to keep people engaged and assist the Republican policy of obstructionism, a tool to make it hard for democratic governments to function while helping Republicans win seats by attacking Democrats for the mistakes and the problems the Republicans create. In the last 28 years, we have had two Republican presidents and two Democratic presidents. The two Democratic presidents reduced the deficit while the two Republican presidents increased it. In the first year of the Clinton administration, Clinton ran a deficit of $290 billion. When he left office, he ran a surplus of $236 billion. Bush started his first year with $128 billion in surplus, ended with $459 billion in the negative. Obama started with $1.4 trillion in deficit, ended with $585 billion. Mr. Donald Trump, whose favorite lie is that he had the greatest economy ever, started with $665 billion in deficit, and he is leaving office with more than $3 trillion in the negative. Don't think it was because of COVID. In 2019, he ran a deficit of $984 billion. He increased the deficit by 47% before COVID arrived at our shores. Obama reduced it by 58% during his 8-year term. Republicans lie, and then they lie, and if they get caught, they will lie even more. And this non-stop lying in the face of facts is not something Donald Trump invented. Republicans have been doing this for 28 years. Bill Clinton left the nation with a surplus. He turned the country with a deficit to a country with a surplus. But Republicans must find a way to say something, isn't it? They did. Stephen Moore, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute and research director of President Reagan's Commission on Privatization, writes this, and I quote, "Newt Gingrich and company, for all their faults, have received virtually no credit for balancing the budget. Yet, today's surplus is, in part, a byproduct of the GOP's single-minded crusade to end 30 years of red ink." Arguably, Gingrich's finest hour as Speaker came in March 95 when he rallied the entire Republican House caucus behind the idea of eliminating the deficit within 7 years. Skeptics said it could not be done in 7 years. The GOP did it in 4. So Clinton was the president, but the budget was balanced because of Republican crusade for 30 years. And this man, Stephen Moore, is crediting Newt Gingrich for balancing the budget. A man who openly admitted for shutting down the government for 6 days because Clinton had seated him at the rear of the plane while coming back from a trip from Israel. Forget Stephen Moore. Here is Joe Weisenthal, who writes in Business Insider that Clinton's balanced budget destroyed the American economy. And the best part is, the housing bubble that burst under Republican administration in 2008 is actually the fault of Clinton balancing the budget. He left 10 years before that happened. It nearly is not even worth repeating what he has written, but in a nutshell, he just got some numbers from wherever possible to paint a story to deflect the blame. That they were in the administration for 8 years after Clinton left gets no mention. That they unregulated the financial industry to the point no one understood what was going on was not a factor. If they knew what Clinton did was so wrong, what were they doing for 8 years? The point is, it is just one lie after another. So what is it, Republicans? Should we accept Stephen Moore and give credit to the Republican Party for balancing the budget? Or should we agree with Joe Weisenthal and say it was the balanced budget that was the reason behind the Great Recession? This is what you call flooding the zone. Write so many different articles, push as much information, as much falsehoods as needed, so the reader gets drowned not knowing what is the truth and who to trust. Did Newt Gingrich balance the budget, or the balanced budget wrecked the American economy? The misinformation campaigns we are seeing now has been going on for the last 28 years, and it peaked in the last 4. But the evidence is there for you to see. The number of times Republicans reduced the budget deficit in the last 28 years, 0. The number of times Democrats reduced the deficit in the last 28 years, twice. The number of times Republican presidents left the country without a massive recession in the last 28 years, 0. the number of times Democratic presidents left the country with a growing economy in the last 28 years? Twice. So why do Republicans talk about fiscal responsibility then? It is a tool that they use to obstruct progress under Democratic governments. Maybe they just know that Democratic administrations are much better than they are. Remember the 2013 shutdown triggered by Ted Cruz? How he railed against overspending and the need to cut back on spending to save the country. How is it worth to shut down the government and send hundreds of thousands of people without pay, all for the future of the country? This is what James Cornyn, the current Texas senator, wrote in Houston Chronicle on January 3, 2013. The biggest fiscal problem in Washington is excessive spending, not insufficient taxation. Tax cuts did not cause this problem, so tax increases won't solve it. If we don't reduce spending and reform our three biggest entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, then we will strangle economic growth, destroy jobs, and reduce our standard of living. With the national debt above 16 trillion and with more than 100 trillion in unfunded liabilities hanging over us, our toughest fiscal decisions cannot be postponed any longer. Republicans are more determined than ever to implement the spending cuts and structural entitlement reforms that are needed to secure the long-term fiscal integrity of our country. Note three words in his write-up. Tough fiscal decisions cannot be postponed any longer. Spending cuts, we need fiscal integrity. The Republicans had full power, the presidency, the Senate, and the House majority for a full 2 years after Trump became the president. So what happened to spending cuts, structural entitlement reforms that are needed to secure the long-term fiscal integrity of the country? Did the Republicans cut spending when they had power? No. Did they get through structural entitlement reforms? No. You know what they did? They increased the deficit by 13.6% in the first year they had full power and 17.1% in the second year when they had full power. In 95, in Clinton's case, Republicans pledged to balance the budget with their contract with America while cutting social programs and repealing Clinton's 93 tax increase. Clinton was willing to balance the budget and indeed wanted to, but he was opposed to Republican methods. Clinton worked with Republicans and Democrats and somehow managed to balance the budget. In 2011, the Republicans once again tried to push the balanced budget hammer on the Democratic President Barack Obama, who was just about dragging the country out of the recession. So don't get me wrong, I prefer the balanced budget, but can you see the pattern here? Whenever Democrats have the presidency, the fiscal responsibility side of Republicans will come out. And whenever they are in the presidency, they will ignore fiscal responsibility and only talk about tax cuts. The ones who we all think care about the balanced economy are the actual reason why we never had a balanced economy since Clinton and why we will never have one under any Republican president. Can James Cornyn and Ted Cruz answer why it was okay to shut down the government in 2013 to cut spending, but it wasn't even worth talking about when they were in full control of Washington for 2 years? Because they don't care. That's the truth. It's all just a lie. And they are overspenders, as the evidence irrefutably proves. And they are blaming Clinton for the failure to stop the 2008 recession, 8 years after he left the White House. Then there is the myth that Donald Trump and the GOP so carefully built that they created the best economy ever. Between 2014 and 2016, the last 3 years of President Obama's term, real gross domestic product grew at an average annual rate of 2.5%. And if we leave the COVID year, the greatest economy ever grew at an annual average of 2.6% in the first 3 years of Trump term. So much for the greatest economy. So Obama takes over when banks are folding like a pack of cards, 421,000 Americans are losing their jobs every month, starts off with 1.4 trillion in deficit, cuts it by more than half by the time he starts the second term, turns an economy that was shrinking by 2.5% when he took over to an economy that grows by 2.5% in the last 3 years of his tenure. Donald Trump takes over a thriving economy that was adding 195,000 jobs a month, starts off with 665 billion in deficit, runs up the deficit by nearly 47% in just 3 years, doles out a massive tax cut for the wealthy, and what does he has to show in return? A 0.1 5% increase. And the entire country bought into the theory that he created the greatest economy in American history. Yet another lie, and the country had fallen hard for. Remember this number, 0.1% increase in return for increasing the deficit by 47%. To a large extent, I will actually pin the blame on the Democratic Party for allowing all of us to get to this point and allowing the Republicans to lie without any repercussions. They should have hammered the Republican hypocrisy on fiscal responsibility. They should have told people how the Obama administration took an economy under recession, rebuilt it, slashed the deficit, and yet managed to achieve a growth rate of 2.5% in the last 3 years. They should have taken all this data directly to the people. There is 28 years worth of evidence showing how Republicans said whatever was convenient at that time, crusaded for spending cuts when Democrats were in power, while ran around spending as much as they can when they were in power. How they repeatedly took great economies and wrecked them. How they always found a way to finish the administration with a recession. How they lied, and whenever they got caught, they just lied even more. This whole Democrats or socialists nonsense is the latest lesson in method acting by this Republican Party. They are fiscal conservatives only when Democrats are in power. Now I am really worried about Joe Biden. We all know who we have signed up for, right? This man is certainly going to reach out to these obstructionist liars. Very soon, the Republican Party will start talking about reducing spending, entitlement reforms, and cry that deficits, one that they added, are way out of control and the future of the country is at stake. They will, because that is what they do. Do as much harm to a Democratic administration as possible. If it is worth winning a couple of more Senate seats by fooling people, then why not? Trump did not break this GOP. Trump is actually the byproduct of years of GOP's metamorphosis. I can totally understand why Trump is getting mad at GOP legislature's refusal to not appoint pro-Trump electors and help him seize power. What's a big deal, right? They have always done this. If voter suppression and gerrymandering is perfectly fine, then what is wrong in throwing 20,000 ballots in Wisconsin and 60,000 ballots in Pennsylvania? He will be like, you guys have always done this before the election. Now let us do it after the election. If shutting down a government is fine to launch Ted Cruz's presidential primary campaign, then what is wrong with overturning election results so that I can become the president? Republican administrations wreck the economy, and it is the job of Joe Biden and Democrats to make people understand the truth. The Republicans are getting away with lying because the Democrats are not doing the work to educate people about the truth. Democrats, if you're listening, stop being lazy. The liars can only lie if you allow them to. Call them out. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe.